Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to one more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. And this week joining us from Germany's Shoaib Naik. Hey Shoaib, welcome to the show.
Hi Vasco, thank you for having me on the show and good to finally meet you.
Absolutely. Likewise, it's good to meet you and looking forward to all of the stories you're going to share with us. So Shoaib is a Scrum Master with over 11 years in software development with experience in multiple different roles from IT account manager, product manager to project manager in product as well as service-based companies. Shoaib is currently in Germany, but he is from India. So Shoaib, that was a short intro. Tell us a bit more about yourself and how did you end up becoming a Scrum Master?
So, that's not a short story. It's a long story. I will try to fit it so that it will fit in your podcast. So when I started my career and since the last 11 years, I always have been in people-focused role. So when I started my career as a IT solutions account manager, it always involved me communicating, collaborating with internal as well as external teams. So you had people-focused consultative-led sales and strategy. After this, I got an opportunity to move to a different role. So I moved to product and project management, where I was focused on product and delivery. And of course, you have the people element again. And finally, when I moved to Europe and was looking as to what job should I do, should I go back to project management or sales? Then I had done a bit of Scrum Master role in my last organization back in India. And then I started applying here as a Scrum Master because it is a people-focused role. And hence, I decided to become a Scrum Master.
Very good. So one thing I'm curious about, Shoaib, is I know that moving from country to country is not necessarily easy. And it is, of course, even harder when you go to a country where the language that is spoken there is so different from your native language. How have you been able to adapt to the German-speaking countries that you've lived in?
So thankfully, the organization I work for, and it's mostly English is a company language, and I work with teams based out of Croatia, UK, India, Germany, Austria. So it's a mix of people. There was just one thing I needed to be careful of. Initially, when I started working here in Europe, the culture is different from India. So I had to be mindful as a Scrum Master. Like, for example, something I might say in India can be considered a joke, but here culturally it might be offensive. So slowly I needed to understand these multiple cultures and multiple people I was working with from different countries. Once I was sure about how things are, then I guess I started being more friendly with the people around.
Absolutely. So that's definitely something that one needs to learn. I remember moving to Germany and adapting to the local culture and how, of course, rewarding, but also difficult it was to figure out the small details, the nuances in the culture that we need to take into account as Scrum Masters. Now, I don't know if you're going to talk about one of those stories, but of course, today is Monday, so we talk about the Fail Monday story here on the podcast. Yeah. So, Shoaib, share with us a story of a moment where you, as a Scrum Master, you were doing your best, but at that time, as it often happens to all of us, you were still in the journey and there was something to learn. But tell us that story first. We'll dive into the details later.
Sure. First, I really like this question, and I want to thank you, Oscar, for including this in your podcast. Because like you said, we don't talk much about failures as Scrum Master or other things as well. I don't know why, but I believe I'm here only because of my failures, because they showed me the way how to improve and get better at what I was doing. And most importantly, I think all my failure stories are a way for me to stay grounded and stay humble. So here's my story. So when I had previously worked in India as a project manager, there was a bit of Scrum Master role as well, in that it was both project/Scrum Master, but I would say it was more dominated by the project manager responsibilities. So when I started working here in Europe as a Scrum Master, I was working for the first time in an agile environment with only we worked only with agile frameworks. So I was a bit confused as to how I should go about it. So I did the easy thing, which was simply I started copying what other Scrum Masters were doing in my organization, and of course I failed at
So
this.
tell me a little bit
Yes.
more. Like, what were some of the things that you were confused by? What were some of the things that you started copying because you thought, okay, so if it works for them, I'll try it myself. Can you give a few examples?
Yes, so I would say as a project manager, I used to do like there was focus on the budget. There was other project manager responsibilities I had, which here as a Scrum Master I didn't have. So once they were taking like once in the Scrum Master role, I thought, okay, as a Scrum Master, do I focus on the delivery because I worked in a project based environment? I was working in a project based environment, or is it more like I should be focused on the people part of it. So hence the easiest way for me to do, instead of doing a self retrospect, I just started copying others.
So can you give an example? What were some of the things you copied?
So I think I would describe that further in my story. I guess one one of the things, the thing first I wanted to emphasize. Uh, I was failing not because what other Scrum Masters were doing in my organization was wrong, but it was something I was like, you can say the mistake I was doing. I didn't take into consideration that that Scrum Master is maybe good at the way he or she has is doing that.
So was it like, for example, you copied the retrospective format or you
Yes.
copied the way they did the daily? Can you give an example?
So I think the way they, for example, they did the retrospective format. I copied it as is, and I tried to do the way they were doing it. They were doing it pretty well because they might have practiced it for a long time, or they were naturally good at it. It went with their personality or with their tone. And when I tried to do that as is, it didn't, because it didn't go with my personality. I have to invent my own style, find my own style of Scrum Master, and of course learn along the way. So this wasn't didn't work out quite well for me.
Yeah. And when did you start to notice that maybe this is just because I'm copying without understanding and without adapting to myself, to who I am? Like, what were the first signs that you got that were like, okay, perhaps this is the wrong thing to do. I can't copy anymore. I need to, seek help or figure out myself what I want to do. Like, what were the first signs?
I think obviously whatever I was copying, I was trying to implement in the team. I was trying to coach it to the team, and the team was not responding. The feedback I was getting, okay, this is not the way like things should be. We are not understanding you. Why are we doing this? And since it was simply copied, and like I was just trying to put it likewise to make things work without, I guess, understanding the logic. I was also struggling to explain the logic of why we should be doing it to the team as well. So hence, and we kept failing sprints also. We didn't meet our sprint goals for, I guess, first 3, 4 couple of sprints. So
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And that's actually a great point when you start thinking about, okay, so things are not working and I'm just doing, what I think is right, but they are not working. Then of course, one first thing that one might think is, okay, so I'm failing, right? The thing I'm doing is right, but I'm the one failing. And of course, you may try different things and so on. Eventually, you find out that actually it's a mix of both, right? It's like it's part of me that I'm failing, and then it's also part of the technique that I'm using that may
Using.
not be appropriate to this moment, right? May not be appropriate to these team members. In fact, that's why we call this podcast the toolbox, right? Because there's so many
Yes.
tools out there that we
Yes.
need to gather, but not
Yes.
use them all at the same time, and of course not always use the same, but rather adapt our approach to what we see, to what we experience with the team.
True, true. I had an example of your podcast. So when I started also listening to your podcast because I was a new Scrum Master. So, and there are so many experience that you share. So I also used to tune into that. I thought maybe I will get the solution to my problems from here. And they were pretty good. But again, I was in this slump, you can say, where I was just copying things. It didn't work out. And once I got out of this slump, your podcast, also listening to your podcast, really helped me. So thank you for that.
Absolutely, no problem. This is why we do it, and I'm glad to hear that. I want to highlight what you just said. It's like when you were in that copying mode, you listened to the podcast, but the things you tried didn't work. But when you stopped copying, you listened to the podcast, but the things you tried worked. And I think this is very important in this story, because it is really the way we look at things that changes the impact that we have in the teams that we work with, right? Like when we are just trying to copy, one-to-one copy and not understanding the why, which is you already mentioned, not understanding the context, then it's not likely we will succeed. But as we start, incorporating more and more of the information we collect during the sprint, right? Like, the team relationships, the relationships with the outside product owners, Scrum Masters, other teams, stakeholders, then we start to understand, okay, there's other things here that we need to emphasize. And I think that's very important. It's also part of our growth, though, right? So it's okay to copy, but maybe it's okay to copy by, talking to another Scrum Master and say, hey, I thought I would be doing this. Can you help me out? What do you think?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Absolutely. It was a great story. Thank you for sharing that, Shoaib.
You're welcome, Oscar.
Monday is about what we learn from our obstacles and our failures. But tomorrow is Team Tuesday here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. We explore teams and their journeys, the habits they develop that threaten their performance, how each of our guests helped their teams evolve, and the one key lesson they learned from that experience. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.